Okay, here we go with the president, the big face of our country, yet Article 2 in the Constitution. And just a reminder in terms of comparison to Article 1, this is pretty short in terms of what the president is allowed to do, but they are the leader of the free world. And that is still a very big issue because of what that means, how much they are able to do. With the imperial presidency that it has become, they have taken the powers that are expressed in the Constitution and they have increased the size of it, similar to how the necessary and proper clause allowed Congress to do it. The president has done the exact same thing, growth of the executive office. But again, with the president, what do we expect out of the president is a difficult thing to define because of all those paradoxes we want. We want somebody who is powerful, somebody who's a good-hearted person. They're going to do good. They're not going to go in and ruin things. They're going to go do good things. Now, we are also fearful of somebody who is really effective and they do their job well. We're not really sure if that's the right balance, and that paradox is created. But why do we have a president? Why is it Article 2? Well, we were fearful of a bunch of different things. And going back to the beginnings, we wanted somebody in power. We were fearful of having nobody, anarchy, the chaos, the lack of trust amongst people. But we didn't want a monarch. We were just leaving the king, so we really didn't want that. And the balance then was a president who wasn't really in complete control, but they were still the head of the country, the chief executive. And because of that, we started to get into the checks and balances. The Senate being separate from the president allowed the advice and consent of treaties, of appointments, and then just the general checks and balances of legislative powers. And because of that, there are some interesting bypasses that the president has taken in order to avoid the confrontations that Congress might be able to influence. And the original concern was, how do we elect the president? And the solution was, of course, the Electoral College. And we know that they need 270 electoral votes. And if there is no majority hitting 270, it does go to the House. But that was a way that they addressed those fears of the founding fathers. We don't want anarchy or monarchy. We need a balance. And we can't have them picked by members of the Senate, because then all they have to do is appeal to those people who are in the Senate, and you have to have a little bit of a connection to the people, therefore the Electoral College. Now, how long do they serve? Well, that's a very recent thing. We have had only one president who has been elected to more than 2 terms, and that was FDR. He was actually elected to serve multiple terms. He ended up being the longest serving president, and there never will be anybody who serves longer than them unless there's another amendment that changes the 22nd. They have a 2-year term max, and that is allowing for 10 years, which we talked about in class. So just thinking back to what happened a couple weeks ago, January 20th, that is Inauguration Day. And Inauguration Day is January 20th because of the 20th Amendment. And with the 20th Amendment, you experienced something, if you were able to get home and watch from those amazing exams that you had for 3 days. It is rare, and they mention it multiple times on TV that this doesn't really happen. This transition of power in the world is extremely rare, where you in fact have President Obama and President Trump walking out together to then go to the Capitol to swear in the next president, and then all the former presidents. That is extremely rare, where there's that peaceful exchange, and there really isn't any feuding as that happens. Now, this is not going to be a historical lesson for you in terms of presidents for what I would expect you to know all presidents, what they're going through. Not exactly. But it's just like anything else. Historically, things have changed because of certain presidents. So one of the big things that we continue to bring up is Nixon. Well, Nixon has changed quite a bit. And so just to think about those general changes that have kind of occurred over time. And without really thinking about it, when I say the imperial presidency, I hope you think of that as a new thing, where it hasn't always been the case that the president is in complete control. They really didn't have a lot of power up until recently. Congress really was Article 1, so appropriately, but they are the ones who controlled a lot of the power. Since the New Deal with FDR booming the size of the bureaucracy and the government agencies, continuing with World War II and the fears of the Cold War, the fears of other communist influences, we have really allowed the president become this imperial president. Now, the official requirements, and this is, again, a pretty big section of the Constitution, are right here. They have to be 35 years old. That's older than both chambers of the House and the Senate. A natural born citizen. This is a little bit different than members of Congress where they have to be citizens for a set number of years. This is they have to be a natural born citizen. So this clause was actually addressing people who maybe were born in Britain and then moved over or something like that to prevent that British influence in American government as the head. And then lastly, they have to reside for the 14 previous years in the United States. So in other words, you can't be born born a U.S. citizen because of your parents and then move to the U.S. and run for the office of the presidency. You have to be established in the U.S. for 14 years. Most have a political background. Of course, we see President Trump, who hasn't really had any political background. He's ran for the presidency before, but not under of the two-party ticket. And that's mainly because most are from other areas. State governors tend to be the most common. Obama was a senator, but the senators often run into trouble because if you're going to be a president, your senatorial record really can't be that open to debate. So you almost have to be a liked senator, but not an extremely effective senator in order to have a chance of running for the president. So those powers that are a little bit shorter for us than the powers that are given to Congress are still important. And Article 2 does establish them, but they also are a little bit ambiguous. And the one that I really want you to think about that I sort of explained was they have in the clause the ability or duty, to execute the laws faithfully. So the faithful execution of the laws. What does that allow them to do? Well, they are in charge of executing the laws, first off, as the executive branch. But that allows them to do a lot. This is where those kind of inherent, the informal powers come from. So this clause right here, the duty to execute laws faithfully, is more so the connection and parallel to the necessary and proper clause of the legislative branch. The commander-in-chief is similar. I mean, they control the army, but with our check, as I brought up, we have a check from the legislative branch of declaring war. Well, the president over history and recently has thrown troops into different areas without a declaration of war. The biggest example of this would have been in Vietnam, where the troops were sent and there was war never declared against Vietnam. So they passed the War Powers Act, which established a set amount of time for troops to be in certain situations. 48 hours, they had to tell Congress why they thought it necessary to send troops somewhere. And if Congress didn't declare war within 60 days, they had to start pulling out troops, and they had a full 90 days, and they would have to be gone. However, that has never been challenged. The president still controls the troops and still can send troops, and the War Powers Act has never been called into action by Congress. The biggest power that the president has, though, is that approval rating. This right here, the greatest source of power, it is from public opinion. They need to have a favorable approval rating, and people will pay attention to them. And it's persuasion. It really is. It's a persuasion thing where the politics of the situation allow the president to communicate, work with people, and then because of that, they're able to be an effective leader and they can accomplish their specific agendas. So a little bit more with power specifically, signing a bill into a law. These are parts of the Constitution. A veto message, that is where they get a bill at their desk, and what do they do with it? They veto it. They veto it, send it back to Congress, telling them what was bad about it. Now, of course, there's a final check, the override, which is extremely rare. That doesn't exactly happen. Pocket veto? Well, number one, pocket veto means that the bill is done. They would do this maybe at the last day before summer vacation. Congress gives the president a bill, and they don't like it, and they'll say, I'm not going to sign it. I've got 10 days and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So the bill is pocket vetoed. On the flip side of that, if they are in session, it automatically becomes a bill without its signature from the president. And that is where you have to consider what would be the purpose in that. Don't attach a name to it. You know the outcome, but you just don't attach a name. The line item veto, not constitutional. So thinking back to the Constitution chapter, this would allow the president to sign certain portions of a bill while vetoing others, but that was ruled unconstitutional in the 90s. The Congress tried to give it to Clinton, and they said that overstretched the powers of the president, that they can't legislate by altering bills. But they do have signing statements. Signing statements are when they sign a bill, essentially, but they also attach a message saying this is a perfect bill, and this is my vision of how we're going to carry out and execute this law that the House and the Senate just passed on to me. So it's kind of like the big rally and promotion of the bill that they signed. Now, the expansion of power is kind of a big focus. So where does the growth come from? The New Deal, the people looking for economic help, then the wars with World War II, and then finally with the growth of Vietnam and Nixon with what they call an imperial presidency, it established the growth of the executive office. And with the growth of the executive office comes more agencies, more jobs, and more distance from representatives and senators for how they actually control the government.